Hi, I'm Tammy Cody. I'm an interior designer. I also teach SketchUp, and I'm excited to bring you my top 10 tips for interior designers that I've learned throughout the years of making lots of mistakes. My number one tip is to stick to the interior design process and then use SketchUp throughout it. This is going to vary from project to project, but I bring SketchUp into the project right from the start, from that initial measure. So I will bring my laptop to the client's house, and as I'm measuring, I will transcribe those measurements directly into SketchUp. I skip the paper and pencil and scratching out the dimensions. I just put it all right in SketchUp, and that's for a number of reasons. Number one, it brings accuracy. I know that I have a lot more details in there. I can see it a lot more clearly. And I also have a working set of drawings right away that I can go ahead and go back to my desk and begin designing. I don't need to transcribe those into the program afterwards. I don't want to take away the mood board or the hand sketching part of the project. If that's part of your workflow, go ahead and keep doing that. But I do encourage you to keep SketchUp throughout the entire process, from schematic all the way to presentation. Tip number two is to help your client learn the purpose of 3D modeling within your project. Your client has likely seen design shows with a lot of animated renderings and an elaborate use of 3D modeling, and they may be excited that you offer 3D modeling as a service as well. So it's important to let them know how you use it, whether it's just simply for 2D drawings or animated walkthroughs. Give them examples of how you've used that in past projects to kind of manage those expectations a little bit more. It's helpful to, like I said, provide examples of the different levels of 3D modeling that you offer, whether it's straight from SketchUp images or renderings. And if you do offer renderings, it's important to remember to charge for those, because those do take extra time. And once your client learns those take extra time, or AKA extra money, they may realize that a SketchUp model is just perfect for making decisions, and they don't need to go that extra step with the photorealism. Tip number three is get to know the layers function. Layers give you a greater control over your model, and they're also a great way to show a few different options within the same space. In this model, I've created one fireplace with this stone option, and I've also created a second option, and I've put them on corresponding layers. So right now I've got fireplace option 1 turned on, and I can toggle that on and off really easily. I'll toggle that off, and I'll toggle on fireplace option 2. So it's nice that I don't have to draw two completely different spaces to show these two options. I can simply put them on their own layer and toggle those on and off. We can also take that a step further and add a scene with its corresponding layer. So here I've got this option 2, and this scene I've got the option 1. So I can toggle that really easily back and forth to show those two different options. Tip number 4 is to lock your walls when you have trouble accidentally moving them, and your floor. So if I hop over to a working scene and begin to move this rug here, I may accidentally get too close to the floor and accidentally move it. So that's actually really common when you're first starting out, is to accidentally move the shell of your home, and you may even just move it ever so slightly and set it down, and you don't really want that. You want to leave it right where it's meant to be. So instead of accidentally moving it and trying to undo, I like to go ahead and just right click on my walls and choose lock. The geometry or the edges will look like they're red. And I do the same thing for my floor, right click, lock. And now when I go to move any piece in my space here, it will only choose the pieces and not the shell of the space. Tip number 5 is to block out your space in 2D in your floor plan, and then it will make it easier to space plan when you're working in 3D. So in this design here, I've got a floor plan, and I've got these simple rectangles blocked out, and those are just representations of the pieces of furniture that will be in the space. So these are sized. This one here is sized to fit the sofa that I'm specifying, and these are sized to fit the chairs that I'm specifying. And it just helps to have these rectangles in the space, or squares, or circles really, if you have a circular table, as kind of a floor plan, so that when you move into 3D, you'll see those rectangles on the ground and you can easily place your furniture right where it's supposed to be, right where you planned for it to be in 2D. So it gets a little tricky sometimes placing things right where you'd like them in 3D because of the perspective. So having those edges on the ground to reference are really nice. And I like to put those on their own layer. So I turn on my layers window here, click my 2D blocks layer, and you can see those on the ground. So they're nice to have on the ground as a reference or on the wall as a reference, but again, I like to turn those off when I'm ready to present so that the client doesn't see them, but I can easily reference them as I'm swapping out other 3D pieces. Tip number 6, don't overmodel for the stage of design that you're in. As you're working through schematic design, just focus on what you're designing in the moment, and don't get too excited about adding in all those fun details like plants and candle holders and everything that you find in a 3D warehouse. I know it's really fun to find those pieces and add them in, but they can weigh down your model and they can kind of hide what you're actually working on, the important part of your design that you'd like your client to focus on. You can add those details later as you get closer to final presentation, final design, possibly rendering, things like that. Tip number 7, don't worry about finding the exact piece of furniture that you're looking for in the 3D warehouse. I can often get hung up on finding the exact thing that I'm specifying in the warehouse, and I do use the warehouse for pretty much all of my furniture and appliances. But again, it's not 100% necessary to find the exact piece. I just find something that is a good representation. I will rescale it a little bit, add the material that I'm specifying, things like that. I'll change what I can about it and go ahead and leave that in my 3D model. Then when I'm presenting in layout, I will often get an image from the tear sheet and place that in my presentation so that they know this is the exact piece that I'm specifying and it's represented here in the 3D model. Tip number 8, add materials towards the end of your 3D modeling process if possible. It's a good idea when you're working on your 3D model to hold off on adding those materials and textures until you're a little bit further into the modeling process. It's a lot like the interior design process. Our client will often bring us paint swatches and pieces of fabric that they like, and we'll file those away and continue working on the space plan and layout and things like that. So too goes with the SketchUp modeling process. You'll want to go ahead and develop that 3D model and then push off adding those materials and textures until you're ready. It's a couple of reasons. Number one, like I just said, it's part of the interior design process. We don't want to get too hung up on specific materials and colors. And then the second reason is that it can be more difficult to see what is going on with the edges and where those edges are when materials, especially like dark flooring materials, things like that, are added. It's easier to see before those are added. If you've already added your materials, you can go ahead and change the face style. You can do that under View, Face Style, Monochrome, and that will pop you back over to a blue and white face style. Tip number 9 is to pay attention to the axis and keep everything aligned when it's appropriate. That axis is going to keep you plumb and perpendicular in your drawing. So when you're drawing, make sure that you look for those green, red, and blue lines as you move throughout your model. And if you're unsure if your geometry is aligned with the axis, you can always check that in your Styles window. So if you open that and go to Edit, you'll see a drop-down menu that says Color by Axis. And that will change all of my edges that are aligned with the axis to the corresponding color. So red for aligned with red, green and blue. If there are any black edges, like this trim right here is black, I instantly know that is not aligned with the axis. Trim is okay. I mean, I would like to change that. It becomes a problem with your walls when you start to add windows and doorways, things like that. So it's pretty important to keep it from the start aligned with that axis. And lastly, tip number 10 is to utilize layout. Layout is an amazing tool to document your designs and keep track of all your different drawings that you'd like to present to your client, and if you need to create construction documentation as well. So I used to take my SketchUp model and I would export 2D images of that model, and then I would import them in to other presentation software, and each time I presented to my client I had to do the same dance: export, import, make sure it looked the same. But now, since using layout and kicking myself for not utilizing that sooner in past years, I now get my pages set up in layout and allow that to dynamically talk to each other. So as I work on my SketchUp model, my designs will also update in layout, and I can document all of my callouts, dimensions, things like that. Layout is just the perfect tool to document your designs as an interior designer without any more exporting and importing into other presentation softwares. You can keep everything native to SketchUp. I'm Tammy Cody, and those are my top 10 tips for interior designers. If you have any questions at all about these tips or other interior design SketchUp workflow related questions, you can find me in the information below.